This hour of the Alan Autry Show is sponsored by Sinlaw, the most realistic artificial grass in the Central Valley.
From NFL quarterback to Hollywood to the mayor's office, and now behind the mic at KXEX, this is the Alan Autry Show. No retreat.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
What the hell's going on out here? Everybody crabbing out there. Nobody. That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So, 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable. Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty!
You're listening to the Alan Autry Show on the best talk in town. Talk Radio 1550 KXEX.
And welcome to Alan Autry No Retreat, Big Wednesday here. So happy to have you with us, whether it be old school radio, which I still love, by the way, that old radio, and on AM is on a lot, from talk radio to oldies channels to some contemporary stuff. But radio's like, you're never going to kill radio. The talk of the demise of radio has been going on for a long time, and somehow it still remains the most listened to form of communication out there. But those on social media choose to tune in. Whatever media that you've chosen to tune in today, I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. So many things you could be doing to fill your time, and to spend an hour with me is very humbling. I'm honored. And I can just promise you to do my best to deliver the truth on the subjects that matter today, important subjects, and also some things that may not be so important, but kind of make us think, make us laugh a little bit. That's what life's all about. It's somebody once said, Alan, in life you're either in a crisis, coming out of a crisis, or heading towards a crisis. And when you look at it, that's probably true. You know, whether it be a personal situation or the world, it's just what it is. So you're left with, gosh darn, you know, that's kind of a depressing way to look at things. You know, I think if you constantly dwell on that, then you know that it's something that is going to take us permanently down in our minds and our souls, and that sort of thing, rather than changing the definition of crisis. Yeah, tough times for sure. And certain things do rise to the level of crisis, but sometimes we make things into crisis or add more importance to them than we should. And then when a real tough thing comes along, a real crisis, I don't know, it seemed like we might have been worn out by all the other stuff that we should not have bothered ourselves with. You know, like, you know, arguing over and over and over about gender-neutral bathrooms. And this is no knock at the trans movement or the gay movement. You folks out there, you hear me talk about common sense. I'm just using common sense. You know, we've become obsessed with so much of these social issues that I don't say don't mean anything, but do they rise to the level of dividing us and making us at each other's throats? I don't think so. And when something comes along, like the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East that's getting ready to break out, when we should collectively as a country and a world look at it as a crisis, I think it's a wake-up call to what a real crisis is. You know, words mean things. I'm one of those that believes that. I believe there's a tremendous power to words. In fact, if you read James out of the Bible, his whole thing there, the whole James passage out of the Bible, about 90% of it cautions us about words, the use of the tongue, how it can build people up, tear people down, can stop wars, start wars. that it's so powerful. He compares it to like a little rudder on a big ship. You have this big, gigantic ship, huge ship, but this little tiny rudder controls where that ship goes, and whether it goes straight and safely through the water, or it heads to an iceberg or crashes into another ship or whatever. The use of that rudder properly is really key to the survival of that ship and the success of that ship. And I think that's true with the dialogue. And my goodness, are we at a place now in this world where words matter? And this brings me up to one of the subjects we like to talk about. Sometimes we gotta treat words preciously. We've got to understand what they mean and the connotation that comes with certain words. Because sometimes we can use words so often, misplace words, misuse words, that they lose what power that they had. And the power that they had was very crucial to understanding between people, to getting through problems with people, to wake up people. And I'm not talking about overusing words like love. I don't think saying I truly, from my heart, I love you, if somebody really loves someone in a righteous way, to say I love you, I don't think you can say that enough to people that you truly love. I'm not talking about that. Now, if you say I love you and it's insincere and you keep saying it over and over again to somebody who they know, that person that you're saying I love you knows that it's just a word and you're just repeating it, it loses value to that person as well. So even the word love can be overused where it loses its impact. But you're going to art class, by the way, Autry's Random Thoughts. This is stuff when I'm laying in bed doing a little show prep in my bed about 2 a.m. What I want to share with the folks. But the word, there's two words I think have been misused in the last, I would say at least last 5 and probably 10 years, maybe even a little bit more, 11, 12 years. 2 words come to mind to me that have been overused that has caused a detriment to our society, our ability to communicate with one another, and have just been used to divide, anger, cause not healthy things amongst us as a people here in America and around the world. And the first one is racism. That, when that was uttered when I was a kid, all the way up to, gosh, my goodness, into my 40s, 50s even, people were very careful before they used that word. You're a racist, you. Or here, right there before you, is a form of racism. Can't you see the racism that's going on in this policy or this or that? And people generally stopped and said, wow, whether it would come from the right or the left, the term racist has been used. So let's sit down and talk about this, because this is really serious stuff. And that was true, after the Civil Rights Movement, our history of slavery in this country, and then the Civil Rights Movement. When I was growing up, that stuff was still fresh in the minds of us. We'd seen the protest. We'd seen the dogs unleashed on black folks and the water hoses and all of this hateful rhetoric. And it was probably one of the worst things you could be called, as a racist, if you're a white person. And but that's been overused so much now that if you question, for example, the effectiveness, just if you say, you know what, let's take a close look at this thing called affirmative action and just try to quantify, and study and see if it really has helped black people advance in society. Has it really broken down these walls that have kept black people from entering the workforce, climbing that ladder, and achieving the American dream? If you just say something like that, let's have a discussion. You're a racist. You're called a racist. And you know I'm not exaggerating here. You can't call in question whether you should have a secure border, that you shouldn't let 8 million people in that we don't know who the heck they are. You're a racist. You hate brown people. You're a racist. I could go on and on to the point where that word right now, I know I'm the farthest thing from a racist. I worked in that equal opportunity cotton, picking cotton with my mom. White people, black people. I played with my little black friends, my little brown friends, and I was raised in the pro sports, intermixed pot. And one common denominator, a lot of us were black, poor whites, poor blacks, poor Mexicans. I mean, we just, that culture I was raised in. And I can just flat sit here and tell you that I don't believe, I look at that man in the mirror, I see a very flawed person with a lot of things that need to get better, but racism isn't one of them. You got a big, long list of my shortcomings, but I don't believe in bottom of my heart that I was born a racist. I just have to push back on that. But you see, and you hear that term used so much that it used to bother me because I would hear it. Well, I also have some racist tendencies. What the heck? I don't know, maybe because I played a big white cop from the South named Bubba. If you watch the show, you see that the character was anything but that. But that was a TV show. But I'd say, well, what in my life do you know about that points to me as being a racist? You don't even know me. You don't know, and you're insulting my mama by saying she raised a racist. I've said this many times. So now, when I hear the word, somebody, call somebody a racist, I don't think, man, I didn't know that about that guy or that lady or that organization. You know what I think? That's a bogus, that's a bogus moniker. What agenda do you have by calling them racist? And that's bad because I'm making a predetermination in my mind before I know all the facts. But it's been overused so much, so inappropriately, so wrongfully, so devastating to people. Because these groups, these hate mongers, that get out there and have made their fortunes on pushing racism, like Al Sharpton, Louis Farrakhan, and you can go on and on and on. They make their money out of getting black people and white people to believe that a certain political ideology or a certain religion, if you're a white Baptist guy from Louisiana with a southern accent, my gosh, you listen to Farrakhan and Sharpton, you are absolutely a racist, born oppressor. Then these people write these books that the college professors make mandatory reading in the so-called elite universities, that you've turned the Ivy League in the biggest, what I think is one of the biggest, strongest racist strongholds in America. And that's sad. You see what they're teaching. They see where they're brainwashing these kids, And it used to be where that type of teaching happened when they entered college. The college professors, many of them were radicals from the 60s. They're long in the tooth now. But they would bring this whole thing that America is evil, that this whole idea of critical race theory was started to be fed into the students when you became a freshman in college. See, the point is, up until then, if you were raised in common sense by parents who were actually fair, and you were given a true rendition of history, and were taught critical thinking to make up your own mind, you came into that freshman year saying, America's imperfect. You knew about slavery, but you didn't think America was the root of all evil in the world. You understood more of the way things really were, the truth. So you had that in your soul, embedded in you, to call upon when you were taught all this nonsense. How do I know? Because I lived it as a freshman. They're at the University of Pacific, and it was supposed to be a faith-based school. I couldn't believe what these professors were trying to pound into my head and into my heart. there were some that just taught like they were supposed to teach. But there's others, I'm so young and naive, I'm going, what is going on here? I don't want to hate my country. I don't want to, and that whole thing about blaming everything on the Jews, it was back on that campus. And University of Pacific was a somewhat conservative, if you want to use that word, college. But what's happened now, so I had stuff the way I was raised to kind of fight back on that. And I had these internal dialogues with myself. Man, I'm supposed to respect this professor, so I'm going to listen to him. It's just hitting me wrong. There's something wrong about this. But I had enough of common sense and truth spoken into me by my parents and my grammar school teachers and my high school teachers, okay, that I had some armor in my mind to fight, to question what I was being taught. The problem is now, that kind of hate America, white, if you're white, you're a born oppressor. There's nothing you can do about it. If you're born black, you're oppressed. And you should not live in a colorblind society. All the stuff that Martin Luther King was teaching that your mom and dad embrace, throw it out the window. Because maybe it's time for Malcolm X hate and division, to the point where if you say you don't see color, you sit down with your black friends or white friends, whatever that may be, and you don't constantly, if you're not constantly aware that you're sitting across with somebody that's a different color than you, if you're not consciously letting that register constantly in your mind, then you're a racist. You try to figure that out. Now, this Robin DiAngelo thing, I've read her book. I thought maybe I was going to get some insight going. I don't want to stereotype a person. I've heard about seen some passages that were lifted out of it and shown, but I want to read the whole book. You've heard about, all of you out there have had this experience. You hear about somebody, how awful they are and this and that, and you, but you finally meet them and they may be completely different than what or at least not quite as bad as they were made out to be by others. And I left my mind and my heart open to that. And that book just confirmed even more so of this whole theory that if you don't think you're a racist, you don't see color, if you don't let the differences in skin color dominate every thought you have at all times, you are racist. And it's got to the point, like I said, now it's so ridiculous that when you call somebody a racist, it doesn't even matter anymore. That's sad because you know why? There are some racists out there of every color, and they're dangerous because they want to perpetuate that racism on others. Now we're going to take a break. All right, Jeremy, ready to come back anytime you are. Ready to go? The word that's been overused to the point where it seems to have lost its effectiveness, and I think to the detriment of not only the United States but the world. And that word is terrorist. All right? We talked about the overuse of the word racist to where it's just meaningless anymore. And then when true racism occurs, it's kind of lost its impact. It's not as egregious and as awful as it rightfully should be when you see racism at work in our society. You should recoil from it, and we fix it. Now, the word terrorist, ever since 9/11, when we saw what true terrorism is, I think there was a consensus that terrorism, for an act of terror in the context that we were talking about, involved violent acts where people were hurt badly and in many cases killed. Now, I will grant you there's different types of terror. When a drunk guy comes home and physically assaults his wife or girlfriend or what have you, that's a form of terror, okay? That's appropriately applied. So I grant there's different types of terror, but the type I'm talking about is the 9/11 type stuff. The terror, when you say the word terrorist, that's what comes to mind. The other term when that happens when, as I said, I'm using the concept of a drunk husband because that's what, God rest his soul, my father natural father, did with my mom, and I hate saying that, but it was true. He was he used the term abuser. He was abusive, very abusive. That was the term used. When you use that term, you automatically kind of thought of that type of bad behavior. And then, I guess the terrorist got the name terrorist, at least what I remember back when I was a kid, 1972. I guess when a kid, I was 20 years old. When we saw during the 1972 Olympics, when the PLO fighters kidnapped the Israeli wrestling team during the Olympics, held them hostage in a hotel. It was a multi-day siege there for all of us to see. First time they'd ever covered anything like that, wall-to-wall coverage, and seeing these masked gunmen out on the deck of the hotel room and knowing that those, I believe it was 9 Israeli wrestlers in there. The negotiations went back and forth, but ultimately there was an attempt to rescue them, and all of the terrorists, all of those gunmen were killed, and all of the Israeli wrestlers were killed. That's the first time I heard the term terrorist used, and that's what's in my mind. Okay, that's an appropriate name, I think. There's some other names you can come up with, but terrorist did the job in terms of what it invoked in me, in my mind, of what a terrorist is and what a terrorist does. They do egregious, horrible crimes under a political banner or religious banner with a total disregard for life and try to kill as many people as possible by the most egregious means possible. Well, you go forward, and there was the USS Cole was blown up. That was a Osama bin Laden operation. There was forget how many Marines, too many, were killed. And Osama bin Laden was quoted as saying afterward, I guess he was watching someplace, he said it was the most beautiful day he'd ever seen. So when someone sees soldiers or people being blown to bits and they call it a beautiful thing, you can safely put the label of terrorist on them. Because I also have to add, when you do the profile of a terrorist in my mind, there's no remorse. There's no remorse in a terrorist. They'll use a cause as a guise. They like doing what they're doing. It's obvious they like to take life. And sometimes they've gotten so far down, they'll take their own life along with it, these suicide bombers. But the word terrorist, up until recently, and I call recently again 5, 10, I'm trying to go back of when it happened, and it's hard for me to pinpoint, but I know it's relatively recent. When you called an individual a terrorist, or he was accused of terrorism, Timothy McVeigh, and I mean homegrown folks, that dang terrorist, man. He was a terrorist just because he was homegrown in Oklahoma. And just because he served in our military, that didn't make him less of a terrorist. He was part of a plot that took down the Oklahoma City Federal Building, killed women and children, daycare center, terrorist. And from what I understand, unrepentant to the day they either shot him, injected him. I don't know how they took him out. But forget, he was a terrorist. Then we had the biggie in our eyes in America, if you're old enough to remember it. Sadly, too many young people aren't old enough to remember it. They're in their early 20s. And that was 9/11, when these terrorists hijacked 3 planes and flew 2 of them into the World Trade Center. The biggest act of terror. Over 2,000 Americans lost their lives, including the people on the plane. We remember that. That was terror. Those were terrorists that did that. But somehow we've decided to go to work on that word in society, some of us, and just flippantly and cavalierly throw that term around casually, to where if you speak up at a school board meeting because your daughter was assaulted by more of a terrorist than that parent certainly is, that if you speak up and you get emotional about that, you're labeled by the school board, the National School Board Association. These are smart people, a respected organization, not just a local school, the National School Board Association decides they're going to write a letter to the president saying that that parent committed an act of terror. That parent is a terrorist. I just want you to take a moment to absorb that. They took that word that was attached to some of the most egregious acts in the history of our country and the world, and then they projected it over to a parent who just had their daughter sexually assaulted in a bathroom, and the school board tried to cover it up. And he comes to that school board, and maybe he did lose it. Maybe he did yell. Maybe they did have to drag him out. A terrorist? You call him a terrorist? You put him right in the seat with those guys that hijacked the airplane? With Al-Qaeda? We have congressmen that are saying equivalency, that if you shop at Bass Pro or buy a ticket to a Jason Aldean concert, you're a terrorist. I heard a guy say that MAGA, by the way, stop using that word if you can't define it. I'm sick and tired, and Mr. President, you too. You don't even know what you're saying when you say MAGA. God respects you. I love you. I want you to do well as our president. I was raised that way. But when you talk about MAGA, try to define it. What is that to you? If you think MAGA are a collection of Timothy McVeighs, okay, say that. But I'm going to take it a step further. This is going to upset some folks. And I've got to preface it properly. January 6th was inexcusable in my book. The right to protest, you bet. The right to yell and scream your dissatisfaction, you bet. Just as I support BLM when they want to go and protest in the streets and say what they want to do. But when you break off and you start killing people, that's a different story. Now, if you break off and throw some rocks and that sort of thing, to me, that's a protest that became a riot. And I'm not trying to be too nuanced here. There's a big difference. Just like Thomas Sowell says, I say this a lot, but it doesn't make it less true. It doesn't matter how smart you are if you don't stop and think. There's people out there about 90% smarter than me that disagree with me right now, but I'm just asking you to stop and think a little bit on this. Bad January 6th. I mean, there is a difference between a riot and terrorist activity. There's a difference between a riot and an insurrection. There's a difference between a riot and an armed insurrection. And it's not just splitting frog hairs. There's big, huge differences in that. Most protests that carry a lot of emotion to it end up having a little bit of riotous actions. You're going to get 3 or 4 or 5 knuckleheads that go too far. Maybe a few more. But it's what you do. Not all crimes are equal. Somebody breaking in my house and stealing my TV, my 55-inch TV, is not the same as somebody breaking into somebody's home like the Manson family and killing them. Crime's not all equal. You have to make distinctions. There's a obviously clear distinction. But on January 6th, okay, you had a protest, a passionate protest. Odds are you were going to have some knuckleheads do some things they shouldn't. What happened went beyond that. You had a storming of the Capitol. People went into the Capitol that should not have gone into the Capitol. They should be prosecuted, and they are being prosecuted. But when you have congressmen, more than one, senators, more than one, and the president pretty much saying, but getting there, but not saying, but agreeing with the congressmen and the senators and many groups around the country, that those folks that went in and broke the law and went into the Capitol were not only insurrectionists trying to overthrow the government, they were armed insurrectionists, which they were not. By the way, the only person killed there was a lady named Ashley Babbitt, who was killed by a Capitol policeman who shot blindly through a window and killed her. And why there hasn't been a full investigation of that, I don't know. But these congressmen, more than one, senators, organizations, they compared January 6th, saying it was egregious as any actions Al-Qaeda has taken. I want you to sit back and absorb that. These folks on January 6th were compared to Al-Qaeda. So when you compare them to Al-Qaeda, you're comparing them to Hezbollah, compare them to Hamas. They're all one big crime family. You know, how do you separate one violent mafia family from another one? Oh, they slit the throats a little bit more humanely. They mow down people with machine guns with a little bit. They don't shoot them 10 times in the head. They only shoot them 4 times in the head. So that crime family is a little bit less violent than that one. You compare January 6th to Al-Qaeda and call them terrorists. I'm not done yet. It gets worse than that. We're seeing now people who do not address someone by their proper pronoun are terrorists. You think I'm kidding you? Go talk to your average Canadian. It's already here in America. Yesterday, Rachel Levine, one of the higher-ups in the military, after the invasion and the horrible terrorist attack in Israel, where kids were burnt alive, heads chopped off. God, I hate even saying this stuff, but we have to, because that's a terrorist. 2 days after, Rachel Levine issues a department-wide memo reminding people there, everybody that works there, to make sure they address everyone by their proper pronoun, or there will be consequences. Oh my gosh, you know what? I'm not the brightest chrome on the bumper, but I just thank God and my parents for the common sense I have. Because Rachel Levine's probably more well-read and people can make jokes, this and that. She didn't rise up to that position solely because she's a trans person. I don't think A lot of thought was put into it. But you don't have enough feel for humanity that you don't send out a memo like that after a real act of terror. Now, in her defense, I'm not going to say that she said that it was an act of terror if you don't address someone as their proper pronoun. She did promise disciplinary action. Okay. But it's uttered all the time with absolutely no pushback from the left, from the Democrats, from Biden, that, there is a bridge too far. And don't denigrate and trivialize victims of real terror. Little babies that were killed by real terrorists by using that term to describe somebody who may slip up and not use the right pronoun. To where now you have a terrorist attack. I mean, what do you want to call them now? Terrorists have kind of lost its... Why is it... You know how I know it's lost its appeal or lost its impact? Look at the support around the world for Hamas. Not the political movement, for the actual action that they took. That next day, before they got any information, they were condoning that act of terror. Not connecting it with a contentious situation of who was there first in what is now Israel, the Gaza Strip, all of that stuff, tit for tat, who was there, whose land is it really, all that. You can't say, okay, I take the Palestinian side, it should be Palestine. But there is no excuse for what these people did, what Hamas did to those people, to these innocent Israelis, innocent little children. And make no mistake, these people, are, especially in Paris and here in the United States, they took the side not of an overall ideology or overall Palestinian issue. They took the side of Hamas. That's like taking the side of the Klan. That's like saying, I supported those lynchings because the blacks had it coming to them. Oh, that's not that. It's exactly the same thing. You tell me where it's different. Well, the black people were innocent. You mean to tell me that little baby sitting at the table that had its head cut off and burnt was guilty of something? What was that little baby guilty of? What was that 85-year-old Holocaust survivor that's being held captive right now guilty of? Of spending some of the best years of her life in a concentration camp? So she deserves to be taken prisoner and held as ransom and killed if America and Israel doesn't do what Hamas tells them to do? I think when words stop, the words that are really precious, they're impactful, they mean something, start being perverted and you can't communicate and you start making moral equivalency with those words and people accept that you can excuse this act of terror and just call it a political expression as a cry for help for Palestine. Don't give terrorism that kind of respect. Because I guarantee you know why those folks were chosen? I don't know this for a fact, but I feel it as strong as I'm sitting here. That was an all-volunteer group that came across that border. That was an all-volunteer group. They wanted to go. They wanted to kill Jews. You know why? Because they like it. They were taught to not only do it, but feel like they were doing God's work to do it. These poor brainwashed kids from the earliest age were taught to do that. But here's the thing, and this is the hard truth on the table. A lot of criticism why America, at this point, will not take any refugees from Gaza. Do you also know that Egypt, right next door, will not take any refugees? King Abdullah today reiterated Jordan will not take not one Gaza refugee. Do you think they know something that we know? Well, let me just give you a few facts. And I don't want to stereotype any group of people. I hate that. But it is what it is. And if you believe the numbers, Hamas in 2007 was elected with 57% of the vote. And from what I've seen, since 2007, there hasn't been any attempt to recall Hamas by the population. And you think maybe that's why Sisi over there, Egypt, says, nope, not one refugee. You know why? Because they know the first in line is going to be those Hamas terrorists. They're going to save their own skin. You think you're going to get your average innocent Palestinian, and they're out there that don't agree with Hamas? You think they're going to be allowed to get to the front of the line? No way. The first ones in line to cross over into Egypt and Jordan are going to be the Hamas terrorists trying to pass themselves off as innocent refugees. Egypt knows that. Jordan wants that. And they don't want them in their country any more than Israel wants them in the country. So what do? Well, let's do what we've always done. Israel's the terrorist. They just say Israel's a terrorist. And by the way, there seems to be irrefutable evidence that this hospital that was bombed and 500 people killed, immediately around the world, unanimous condemnation, these groups. This is Israel. This is a war crime. Netanyahu needs to be hung. This is an example of how Israel overreacts. Oh, hold on for a second. They forgot that Israel has tremendous surveillance capabilities. They've got the videotape, not fake tape, real videotape, of rockets being launched by Hamas, and about 1/3 of those rockets every single time misfire. 1/3, that's the calculation. 2/3 only make it. 1/3, they crash and burn. Well, sometimes they crash into things. And apparently they have irrefutable proof that they're showing Joe Biden today, and they're going to be made available to the world, that shows that bomb did not come from Israel, that rocket that hit the hospital and killed the people. It came from a Hamas. Well, they're saying it's Islamic Jihad, which is their brothers over there. Islamic Jihad and Hamas, you can't tell the difference between those two. That Islamic Jihad fired the rocket. It misfired and fell to the hospital, and we had the tragic incident happen. And they supposedly had the proof. You think you're going to hear an apology? You're going to hear any criticism that, hey, Islamic Jihad, you should be careful to make sure your rockets work and you hit the hateful Jews and not our people? No, because they don't care. They think that's just collateral damage. These people kill each other all the time if you don't toe the line of radical Islam. I know what I'm doing here. I've been told, Alan, your thing goes worldwide. You got a small audience, Autry's Army, but you're a target for pointing out these things. Well, you know what? I'm not going to try to play. I want to live as much as the next person. But I want to be able to look at that guy in the mirror, who's ugly enough as it is, and not see a coward at this time in history for my kids and my grandkids, because they're going to inherit the world that comes out of this mess. And I don't want to be on my deathbed when I can't do anything and I can't talk even on the radio anymore. What a lonely, horrible feeling. Be laying there in some hospital, however age I'm going to be, not being able to really do anything with the platform God had given me, and woulda, coulda, shouldas, keeping me awake. You got to die doing something. Now, this isn't an invitation for somebody to take me out. I'm just saying I got to tell the truth. I love nothing better to see peace in the Middle East. The Palestinians, Israelis sit down, figure this thing out. All of Middle East. My goodness, haven't you had enough killing of each other? Give peace a chance. Give peace a shot. And it's a generational thing, and I think it happened. I'm not one of those. I don't believe the Bible predicts totally that, Armageddon, when it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. But we got to do our best to that it doesn't happen. God expects us. He says, blessed are the peacemakers. This is Alan Autry, No Retreat. Appreciate your time, folks, so much. God bless you and your family. And just do your best and let God do the rest. And that's all we can do. And that's all he expects of us. So that's all we should expect of ourselves. Just do our best, let God do the rest. I love you all. Bye-bye now.
Until then, who cares about the clouds?